Okay, welcome to Social Distillation, the submarine still of the internet, where we attempt to drop the bead and pour white lightning straight onto your brain. And today is going to be a two-parter because I was going poopy a lot yesterday.
Yeah, yeah. For those that don't know, there are other illnesses other than COVID-19, and
What?
pretty much because everybody locked themselves up for a year, they're rampant right now because our immune
Mm,
systems are a little behind on its
mm.
adaptation. So all these diseases are changing over and over and over again, and unless you're exposed to them constantly, you will not have the defenses for them. I was active pretty early on in the process just because of what I do and because I live in South Texas. So I'm the only one I know that's not sick.
Yeah, I have. Now my daughter doesn't get sick very often, um, but we've all had what I would describe as the crud, because it's just random not feeling goodness, whether it be cold-like symptoms or some sort of stomach bug feeling, all this year, much more than usual. Usually it's you know, uh, in the fall you get a kind of a cold-like thing as that starts to go around, and then maybe in the spring something else comes around. Usually for me it's just some sort of allergy gunk, but it's been a half dozen times this year
Mm-hmm.
that we've had just low-grade blah.
Well, I'm pretty sure just partly because of what I do, I probably have a pretty robust immune system to begin with.
Hmm.
Anybody who's ever worked in a sports performance facility and anybody who's ever been the intern there, you're the one who stretches out all the big fat linemen. So you lose any germophobia right away with their leg. Just think of that scene from, what was it, Something About Mary,
Yeah,
where the big hairy bellies into the guy's face as they're playing basketball. That was every day. I would have to take
yeah.
extra clothes for after that group just to take a shower. But then also we wrestled, and I continued after high school and college with the MMA, so there was a lot more exposure there. And what about 12 years of doing that? When did you start the wrestling club? Sophomore or junior year?
Senior year, actually.
Oh yeah, well we
No,
started
we
practicing
tried it
junior year.
junior
Yeah.
year and it was killed, and then senior year we actually got into some meets.
And then I retired, as much as you can from a small middling career in 2009 from MMA, because that's when Ben was born. So yeah, about 12 years of rubbing up on other people's sweat every day, that and could be random people, and never had a staph infection. And I also boast no one has ever had a staph infection from my gym. I hope banging on particle board works the same
Mm.
as knocking on wood, but it's exposures and then just being smart. you
It's almost like stressing yourself helps you grow and strengthen,
know what
huh?
what now?
Speaking of which, let's stress my mind because you went down a rabbit hole, man, that I was trying to stay away from.
Oh, yeah, let's get to the board first because it's kind of a
Okay,
recap too. Because
okay,
you made a comment in our last. This first part is religious episode, by the way. For
yeah.
those, this is in place of Wednesday school or Wednesday's night service or whatever we're calling it. Uh, but you made a comment about the growing number of atheists in the last conversation. You said this is actually a new phenomenon, that atheists actually exist.
Well, the it's one of those things that's hard to, you can from research data and poll data. Yeah, at least in America, I've seen polls that in both America and Europe, um, church attendance is down lower than it's ever been, as
Mm-hmm.
far as that kind of data has been kept, as well as self-identifying as, Christian or some sort of, believer in a higher power. So in that sense, yeah, it's definitely down. And of course,
It's
the
going to be
outspokenness
Yeah, it's going to be a
makes it.
hard thing to measure because there are things that would cloud that data, like the fact that if you claimed you were an atheist in Salem, you didn't continue your gene pool at
Mhm.
that point because you were burned alive. If you were in, Inquisition Spain, during that time, you weren't really making it public that you were
Well,
a
just
non-believer. But and that's just those are just two examples. Any Islamic country to this day,
mhm,
it's hard to come out and say something like that. It and so you're going to have a skewed data set there. But let's go with the presumption that it is increasing. And because remember, I did the last board, it was 1A, 1B with the this
uh-huh,
exists and this is where religion comes into it. Well, now we got to see this is where these are the secular answers to those things. Right. So the first one was afterlife, right? The fact that we all know we're going to die, and it's comforting to have an afterlife. It's stress relieving, and
mhm,
it kind of answers a question that we're afraid to even think about in a nice way. Well, I got the book up here, Selfish Gene. There is a secular answer to that because we have a genetic disposition to propagate ourselves. And in essence, if your genes keep going on, you live forever. And when you really break something down, that innate feeling, we have innate feelings about things we can't explain all the time because processes are happening
mhm,
in our body all the time. And if you've got that innate feeling to propagate your genes, that in and of itself is that feeling of something beyond yourself, something that's going to continue on after you're long dead. Hopefully, if you manage to do it right. Uh, another example of that is think of if anybody's ever been in the dating scene long enough, not just you met up with somebody and you hit it off and you wanted to spend more time with them or anything like that, but that every once in a while where you look at somebody and they look back and you both get goosebumps and you're just like, it's a match right there. Might not be a match forever, but you know
mhm,
you know this is guaranteed. This is going to work. You got goosebumps, everything. You've got pheromones running back and forth. You're basically in the same hormonal state at exactly the same time, and then add the visual cues. All of those things are happening without you knowing it, but you say love at first sight, or or some other version of that statement, right? So we have these feelings about things that are under the surface. We just can't explain them. Well, now that we know a whole shit ton more about genetics, we've got at least somewhat of an explanation, a partial
mhm.
explanation. So that's number one. And I'm going to let you have your thoughts on all of these as we go through.
Well, it, you kind of answered my thought there at the end of the partial explanation. To me, and and this is where I enjoyed Berlinski's book more than you did because I enjoyed him taking the piss out of Dawkins. Because for me, yes, Dawkins is quite brilliant, especially his earlier books, where he really laid out some fairly new ideas. But my problem every time I've heard him speak, especially or when he would, debate people, he's entirely too simplistic, which sounds stupid to say about someone who's so smart, but he takes these ideas of these genetic components and then says, ergo. Well, it's not an ipso facto thing. It's that's interesting. That's an explanation. That is a contributing factor. But human beings and human behavior is so ridiculously complex. I think it's too simplistic to say this answers those questions. No, this lends insight into those questions. Something I always think about in this, guys, is a sense of humor. Yeah, I'm sure there's a genetic component to a sense of humor, both being able to, make other people laugh and then what makes us laugh. But it is incredibly bizarre and almost random seeming what makes people laugh and how people have different senses of that. You
Mm-hmm.
know, uh, a lot of us males never stop being 12 when it comes to a sense of humor. And so, the sexual and scatological makes us giggle, no matter how old we get. For some, it does. Some people grow out of that. Most males, I would say, don't. Um, Most women don't laugh at that. Some do. And you have people like Seinfeld is an example I like to use because he's huge. You know, he made $1 gazillion with one of the biggest hit sitcoms ever. He never made me laugh. The only thing I ever laughed at if I watched Seinfeld, and really I only watched it if someone else was watching it, was Kramer. He made me laugh. Uh,
Well, I had the hots for Julia Louis-Dreyfus at the time, so I watched every
uh,
once in a while for
what
the
was
episode where her shirt was coming open and things like that. It was
the fat bald guy's name?
George Costanza.
Yeah, he would make me laugh. But Seinfeld himself, his shtick, his humor never made me laugh.
Mm-hmm. Well, there are some semi-universals. Again, nothing is absolute,
Mm-hmm.
but with humor, the semi-universal is wit, right? Even bad puns are witty,
Mm-hmm.
right? Or slapstick comedy isn't just. We've seen bad versions of slapstick comedy, right? But then you've got Charlie Chaplin. Even falling can be funny if you do it at the right time, in the right moment, in the right
Mm-hmm.
context, right? Just randomly falling, maybe somebody would laugh, but that's more of a that's not necessarily the fact that it was humor. It's just that they're kind of a shitty person. But the if it's done well, or even if you see your gym fails and stuff like that, they do it with a backdrop of music or in a certain context
Mm-hmm.
to make it more funny. So there is,
Everything is funny with the Benny Hill music.
yeah, pretty much. Gosh, I remember watching that every night. Oh God. But yeah, the universal is it's usually a sign of wit.
Mm.
And it's a quick sign of wit. You can gauge somebody's kind of intelligence level in seconds if they're basically funny right off the bat. But that, I think the point I'm making here is, like you said, there's not an absolute truth, and it doesn't
Mm-hmm.
explain everything. But when we talk about the increase in number of people that believe X, what would that number be if everybody at a age they were able to understand it was required to read The Selfish Gene? How many people have read that book? Millions, but not maybe 1% of the population have read that book. How many people would read this genetic propagator theory and their line of thinking at least go in the direction of someone like myself or Dawkins versus just never being exposed to it? So we've got an explanation, and a lot of people are exposed to it. So therefore, ergo, you're going to have a raise in number of people who are
Mm-hmm.
going to follow this more secular type lifestyle. Number 2, nature was scary, right? Was 2A.
Yeah.
Well, that one's the
Nature's
easiest
still
one.
scary, and you better keep that in mind if you ever go out in nature.
Yeah, but it's not as randomly scary as we once thought it was, to where
Mm-hmm.
we have to try to explain it off in some way, because we know weather patterns to some degree. We know the way the tectonic plates shift to some degree. Very little is actually unexpected these days when it comes to nature. Number 3, what was it? 3A. 3A was control and predictability being
Uh-huh.
stressors.
Uh-huh.
Well, a lot more things in our life are analytical instead of emotional in thinking because of tech, realistically. Even if you take tech as simple as a daily planner, we've already integrated technology in a way to take some of the unpredictability out of life. Now, this one's a little bit more vague. This one, it was also the more vague one when we were talking
Mm-hmm.
the other day, but so much more about our daily life, especially when it comes to our work environment or our family life, is kind of set. We don't have a whole lot of variance every day, and we definitely don't have unexplained natural events coming in and ruining it all, other than COVID-19. But again, going to point 3, most of those effects were what our government was doing or what our social institutions were doing, not the actual disease itself. So we do gain a little bit more predictability and control just because of the nature of where we are technologically. Here's an example of that: air conditioning. I can control the temperature in my house. So therefore, I'm not constantly playing this battle of wearing more clothes, wearing less clothes, trying to figure out the pattern so I could store food properly, or any of these other things we had to
Well,
worry
just
about.
just comfort. You can look at that if you look at demographics of the United States for the first 150 years of our nation's existence, the top half of the country basically, and then on the West Coast because it's more mild, so more on the West Coast, that's where population would grow, and it grew fairly steadily, and growth in the South was much slower. And then air conditioning is invented and starts to
Mm.
become widespread, and suddenly southern populations start to spike.
Which is funny because naturally we're actually a tropical species. So the fact that we lived in cold was actually the bigger surprise than people living in warmer climates. But yeah, it's a great example. We have so much control over our environment from something as simple as air conditioning
Mhm.
that
But to your point there, to point three, see, I would add a big capital should,
well,
because
well,
I
that's
think,
that's where comfort creep comes into it, because
yeah.
we get used to the comforts and we start stressing about less comfortable things. But as far as actual physical stressors of life that would actually threaten your life or threaten your livelihood, we have so much more control over that. Now,
Mhm.
there's a sub point to that you just brought up, is we're so adapted to stress that we look for stressors. So when we've taken the uncomfortable thing out, less impactful things become uncomfortable. Like right now, I'm
I'm gonna,
sweating my balls off, but it's probably 72 degrees in here. I'm gonna have to check. I might have to pause this check to see if she turned the heat on, because we did get cold for like a day here, and then
yep.
it got hot
Yeah,
again.
we had cold for a week. So I don't want to go too far down this rabbit hole, but it's more than just the we're adapted for stress and we look for stress. To me, and a lot of smarter people have actually written a lot about this. We have also feminized ourselves, which we're not allowed to say this, but women and feminine men and feminine women tend to be more emotional. And we have a big chunk of our society that has been structured and focused on women and girls. The education system. The education system is primarily run by women, and it has been structured to focus on the way girls learn and behave. So you're forcing boys into this confine of feminine energy, feminine ideal, feminine structure. And then you add on top of that how many boys are being raised by single mothers and they see their dads on the weekend. And then they go to school and they're being taught by a woman in a structure that has been designed by women for women.
Well, and there's a great article and a whole book from the same author on this topic. He's out of the Brookings Institute, and he talks about school. And the thing is that the structure of school hasn't changed a lot in the last 100 years, but the performance of girls versus boys has.
Mhm.
And he goes through a historical review of it, and basically when we took the actual sexist things out of girls' development, it turns out that that was a game they were just better at. This sit down and learn things all day in a
Mhm.
desk. And so when you took out all the actual structural barriers out of it, it wasn't that we made school for them. It's just they happened to be better at that game to begin with, and we took out the thing that was holding them back.
No, see,
So
I disagree because the outline maybe hasn't changed. The way people go to school and the way school is, structured schedule wise, that is very similar, but the details have changed radically. Both the courses, both the syllabus of what is being taught, but then also how. You have a lot less uh you have a lot less outlets for male energy, for the rambunctious boy. Recess isn't what it used to be. PE isn't what it used to be. You have much. You rarely have something like a shop class. A lot of that is gone or has been radically changed.
Yeah, that gets more true the higher level you get too. But well, I do talk with a lady that works at an alternative school here, and one of the common things things that comes up is these boys keep wanting to fight, and my thing is, you know what? Let them fight.
I loved I didn't know that about Japanese schools, and I loved that example. I think that is absolutely brilliant the way they handle things.
Yeah, if it's a fair fight, someone will win and someone will lose, and everybody will get on with their day. And actually, those two males will probably be friends at some point in time, especially if it's a fair, respectful fight.
Mm-hmm.
If it's an uneven fight, they do break them up, but they let the peers break them up, not the teachers. So, yes, there is something about unfair fights, but at the same time, how you handle that is different, because you're just actually making it worse on the loser, on the less the least apt to win that fight if you step in. Actually, even losing a fight can be masculating if you did better than you were supposed to.
Mm-hmm.
If that big bully thought he was just going to beat you down and you damaged him a little bit in the process, that's a win.
The inverse is also true. A lot of people don't know. So, Rocky Marciano pummeled Joe Louis, uh, and it was way after Joe Louis's prime because the IRS sucks and the government sucks, and the IRS came after Joe Louis and he needed the money, so he stepped in for this huge prize fight. It was the greatest of the last generation and the greatest of this generation, and Rocky Marciano said that after that fight, he went back in the locker room and cried because he knew that wasn't the Joe Louis. He knew that he was way overmatched, way past his prime, and Rocky Marciano felt bad about the beating that he gave to Joe Louis.
Mm-hmm.
That's one of those things. You beat the champ, you're supposed to feel good. If you're a masculine man, you know when the fight was one-sided and wasn't worth anything.
Well, spoiler alert, the end of Rocky 1. Rocky didn't win the fight, but he was the severe underdog who fought him till the last bell. That was the whole point.
The whole point was he never went down and he took it to the decision.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. That's a big reason, if not the reason, that movie is timeless. Is because of that idea.
Well, and it also made for the fact that the sequel was actually equally as good because you still had something to work towards.
Mm-hmm.
So,
and then in 3, you
that's
had
that's
Mr.
a
G. Hulk
we,
Hogan,
we're
so
yeah we've got to delve. We're going to dive into that subject just because it's so big for us, anyways. As far as the boys in school and things like that, because there are some interesting ideas. I mean, but you also got to look at the downstream effects of these ideas. Like, one, not to expound on it in this conversation, but he talks about one of the solutions possibly starting boys later, but at the same level. Say, like, a girl starts at 5, where the boy would start at 7 in kindergarten. Now, the downstream effect that jumps to my mind is, well, what happens when they start dating? Now you've got a situation where you have a lot older boys and younger girls at the same level in school. Well,
I think that might actually help with some of the teenage drama because boys develop later.
Well, yeah,
so.
it might be the answer to a lot of issues that are going on with some stuff, but there also could be negative effects to that downstream kind of thing. So yeah, we'll go into a whole episode on just boys in school, because we could probably talk for 10 episodes on that.
Mm-hmm.
But
well, let's get to 4C here because we said we weren't going to spend a lot of time on this.
Okay, so the last one was unifying force, right? Was 4A. or people are tribal, and then the biblical answer was it gives you a unifying source. Well, we have so many more options for that now, and for good or for bad.
Yeah.
Nationalism is a unifying force for good or bad. Identity politics is a unifying force for good or bad. Your religion is a unifying force for good or bad. Your soccer team is a unifying force for good or bad. Your favorite pop artist is a unifying force for good or bad. So we have a lot of options for that now. We're not stuck on our farm every day having to deal with people just when we went to the market and then needing something to kind of bring us together other than I need your barter, So it's the information error, but it's also we have options on everything that we used to not have options on before.
Yeah, the problem is we need so one of the newer YouTube channels I watch is called The Little Platoon, and it's a reference to I believe it was Edmund Burke who had the idea that we're all in these little platoons, but they join together to make a larger and larger units, the company, the battalion, et cetera, and so forth, in the analogy. And the idea was that like the family group is the platoon, okay, and then the neighborhood is the company, and then you go out. So those kind of smaller things of unity can be good things because we've talked about the numbers of people you can legitimately really know and be friends with versus acquaintances with versus whatever. The problem is we are balkanizing so that uh the small ends up reflecting the large.
Mm-hmm.
It an example being, a number of people have commented on this, and set aside whatever you think about the issue itself, but it's ridiculous that I can guess and be pretty accurate about what your politics are by whether or not you're wearing a mask outdoors or not.
Mm-hmm.
That's ridiculous. That issue, that idea shouldn't be connected to all these other things. They're totally separate issues. They're totally unrelated, and yet here we are.
Well, yeah, and we've hammered on this before, but if I can tell your abortion stance from your economic policy,
Mm-hmm.
then you're part of a group. You're not a free thinker. If I can tell those two things, now to have those two go in line with that, that's fine, because you can have those independent thoughts and them line up that way. But if I can tell without knowing anything else about you what those two things are, then you're probably part of a group.
And then start pointing out, okay, well, then on this issue,
Yeah.
you think this, and on this issue, you think that. And it shouldn't work that way.
That's the misconception about us. See, I call myself an independent, a centrist. People think centrist means you're halfway between on everything.
Mm-hmm.
That's not the case at all. Centrist means that sometimes I'm this way on this, sometimes I'm this way on this, sometimes I'm halfway between, sometimes I'm 3/4 of the way there. It just means you can't say I am red or blue, because there are things I disagree with on both sides, and there are things I agree with on both sides. And there are things that are the same issue and I disagree with on both sides.
Mm-hmm. We've talked about this with fitness. Is this is kind of one of your big bugaboos, is there are very, 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 very few absolutes for most things. It's not an either or, it's an and or a but. And it doesn't mean that the real answer is smack dab in the middle, but it's somewhere in there.
Mm-hmm.
It may be way over on this side or way over on this side, but it's not exactly this.
Or even it just needs more information. Like, what's your goal?
Mm-hmm.
Where are you starting from? How much time you got? Uh, what health considerations might get in the way of certain types of training. Those are the top four I can think of right off the top of my head. And those four could change everything. You're on beta blockers. Well, guess what? I just got to throw out all my high intensity interval training because it's going to do nothing because I can't raise your heart rate. Right? But at the same time, that exact same person saying the medicine might benefit because they have very little time to work out. So we need to do some high intensity interval training to get their cardiovascular health up. So slight change changes everything. And then there's just the fact that what do you like to do? I had someone send me a program the other day, and she was like, I know I've heard some of your criticisms of this before, but I really like it and it makes me feel great. Well, guess what? I can't argue with that answer because if you really like it and it makes you feel great, you're going to get a great result from it.
Yeah. We were talking about Brett Contreras last time we were talking about fitness. That's another reason I like him is he flat out said, I don't remember in what video this was. I think he was talking about glute bands, and he was talking about, different things you can do with them. And several times in the video he said, I don't know that they do much, but I have a lot of clients that really like this. So we finish up with this. I'm like, yeah, that's the way it works.
Yeah. And if any good trainer is going to have a nice, fun balance of what your client likes and what they need. And if you give them what they like, a lot of the time, they're never going to argue when you give them something they may make an offhand comment, but they still do it. When you give them something they don't like, but they actually need. So it's just part of it's relationship building. There is an art to this. It's not all 100%. Well, you need to be between 18 and 22 sets of this movement for this exercise. And there is some of that, and that's the base you go from. And then you play with all the other variables around likes and dislikes and everything else. So, but I think we went far afield of where we were.
Probably.
But well, because it was in groups. There is no in group if you do it that way, because you can't be a bodybuilder and have that train of thought, because then you're going to have to get outside of your box every once in a while, and it's going to be stressful. But now to continue this, we've had two directions we kind of wanted to go, and one of them's way off the path we had gone, which is looking into the cults, which is something we need to address because in the Sunday school stuff, because it's important.
Yeah.
I mean, this is where this stuff goes wrong too, not just how it's right. And then, but you wanted to see my genetic stuff. And I was going to surprise you with it at some point because it is very relevant to where we are in the creation story, going into Adam and Eve and Cain and Abel and stuff going forward. And let me do that first, because then you can then while I'm going through the cult stuff, you can be putting your thoughts together on where to go with that.
Okay.
And so the one that takes us way afield we'll do last, but the one that was kind of in line with what we were going. So the review here is the concept of the story as a metaphor and where the origin is the creation, and then Adam and Eve, and then the story going forward from the biblical sense versus my position of it's actually kind of a condensed explanation of the evolution of man and our transition from wild to civilized culture. And in doing so, you create kind of a guide, a rule book, a user manual, so to speak, for your society. And the difference between the two. Now, they both have the same end result, so we're not in disagreement there, because it does provide a guide to keep civilized order going. It's just where that origin comes from. And part of my end of it is man started again, we're a tropical species. We started in a place that was really kind of abundant. We didn't farm, we didn't till, we didn't have to wear clothes. And this is where the genetics came in, because I don't know if if I've ever talked about my genetic testing, I've done Ancestry. Ancestry is a big, broad overview of kind of where you came from in the last 500 years. But I also did one what is it? CGI? CRI. Hold on. Whoops.
Is this the one that gives you more detail about genetic markers for health things?
Yeah, you can get all of that CRI, but it goes to the beginning of man.
Oh.
Yeah. So there's stages of this, and they call them the haplogroups. And you get the paternal, which is where the progression of your Y chromosome, and you get the maternal. And it basically takes you from the first man and the first woman ever recorded in fossil history and DNA history to where basically ancestry picks up. So it's kind of a good combination to get those two. And I think I got any private identifying markers off the screen here, other than you're going to see the male Y chromosome from the first Adam. So let's see, for those that can see that there, if you're not just listening, that's a very abundant resource area, warm area, very little need for clothes other than something to cover your junk so you don't get bit by a snake in the nuts. But
because that would be bad.
But again, if you're looking at this from that progression model, watch my genetic history from the male side. Is that coming through in real time?
Yeah, sorry, I was looking something up.
Oh.
This is kind of cool.
And then from there, it expanded into Europe, and you get your ancestry breakdown, because my ancestry breakdown is basically Eastern Bloc. Eastern Bloc and French and Irish, pretty much. But this is the father's side, which the father's side was more diverse on the ancestry. But you see kind of that marker where they kind of cut off there, to where it kind of expands into. This is the point in history where we expand into so many different civilizations that everything just spider webs out. But everything was on a small enough scale, you can kind of map it as it's going. So that's my father's side. And then let's go to Eve. Starting down. So Adam and Eve weren't actually in the same garden, by the way, if you look at that.
Well, in the fossil record we have access to your earlier point.
Yeah. That was a big
That's
jump.
interesting.
Yeah.
I'd be curious what the does it give you an idea of the time differences between these markers?
I think if I click on these, it does. 20 to 25,000 years ago was that one, and then the next one before it is
25 to 40.
25 to 40. So I mean, tens of thousands of years.
Yeah.
But let's go back to the how do I get back to the overview? Oh, we'll go back to the father and go from there. So I'll let this play out again as we talk for a second, but I'm going back to the overview for something very important, because look at where we are up until this point, and then look where we go. Up to the Mesopotamian era, and then spread out again from there. And that happened on both sides of the family for almost everybody of European, Eastern, anybody who's not of African descent. Also might be where we got our Neanderthal genes from, but because everybody of not sub-Saharan African descent has Neanderthal genes too, almost.
Yeah, I thought it was mostly just people who came from Europe, because I thought Neanderthals were mostly just in Europe.
Yeah. But right around CF, The same place happened with Eve too.
Mm-hmm.
Right around CF was basically everything not African, pure African descent, not just people moved in and out African descent, kind of met in that spot and then expanded out from there. Well, this is also the time in space where we would actually need things like clothes, and we don't have year round fruits and vegetables and wildlife
Mm-hmm.
to choose from. So we would have to go to agriculture. We would have to go to these other means. But and I think, did I bring it up to you? Which is chicken or egg? Was it clothing came, or the biblical order, which is uh, modesty came and then clothing, or the other way around, where we got clothing and then these things we didn't see every day. Well, now when we saw them, they aroused us because they're markers of sexuality. But when they were there every day, all day, because we weren't wearing clothes, they didn't arouse us. It took more to arouse us. As we talked about the comfort creep, well, creep
Mm-hmm.
goes the other way too. You can get an insensitivity as well. So you weren't aroused until you were ready to mate, which was probably other signals like pheromones and things like that. So then enter a day and age where almost all the time you're wearing clothing to keep you out of the sun, to protect you from the cold, and then you see a booby, and all of a sudden that thing you don't get to see it all the time, you're not desensitized to,
Mm-hmm.
and your loincloth raises up. So so again, which came first? And that's important. It seems stupid and small, but it's an important thing because we're talking about the truth of the story versus the story explaining a human thing.
I was looking up something I'd mentioned before, and I couldn't remember the name of it. It's called Becoming Human. It is a three-part Nova series, which I think you can watch on PBS uh, with ads. Some of their stuff you can watch uh, on their site, and some of it you have to be a PBS subscriber because everybody has their own thing now. But it's older. It's 2009, but it's a really deep dive into so something that annoys me is when people say, this is the thing. Okay, well, tell me how you know that. I want to know how you know that, right? So, to your point, these are those haplogroups are what we know of DNA markers based on what we have found. Well, they actually talk about in this in is the way and the speed at which DNA degrades. So they talk about this is what is required to find a, a usable genetic sample. And then this is what we have to do is leave it spinning in a supercomputer for a while, because even with a usable genetic sample, there's going to be a lot of gaps that have to be filled in.
Mm-hmm.
So it's really hard to find a usable sample in the first place, and then it's hard to figure out, okay, what's in that sample. So that's why uh, and I was interested to see the maternal side, the markers were much more spaced out. There were fewer markers, there were fewer haplogroups than on
Mm-hmm.
the paternal side, and that's one of the reasons why that occurs.
Mm-hmm. Well, not only that, but when you're talking about uh, moving some, as things coalesced and became, individuals became tribes, which ultimately became civilizations.
Mm-hmm.
Some just moved more than others.
Mm-hmm.
And if one side of your family just happened to be in that less mobile, there's going to be bigger gaps in between. And that could be just the case as well. So is column A, column B too. But also, the more people that use this stuff, the bigger their database grows, and the more accurate these things become,
Mm-hmm.
because they're doing probabilities and data points. Because when you go to the individual family members part of that, where, you know, this many years ago, you had someone in your paternal group from Punjab, India, which was I keep bringing that one up because apparently I'm 4% Punjabi Indian, but it says we know this with 92% accuracy. And some of them will say, well, you had such and such from the British Isles at this time. We know this with 80% accuracy.
Mm-hmm.
And the more data points they get, the more accurate that's going to become, because it's just going to all kind of coalesce into this giant mathematical algorithm. But it's interesting. But just to go along with the story, this is actually one of the things that kind of got my brain working in this direction, that the Genesis story is actually just a post hoc explanation of all of the tens of 20s of thousands of years before it, and then going forward, kind of this is why we have to do things differently than the wild, which I think is as is, if we accept it as something like that, it could also still be a living document, as we've talked about before. What happens when technology changes everything, which is where religion is kind of beating its head on a wall right now, is some of these rules are counter to how society's going, for good and bad. Not for it's kind of neutral. Some things are progressive in the true sense of the word, and some things are progressive in this is not good for people, but it's going forward anyways.
So this is something that Crowder talks about that I actually agree with and doesn't annoy me. Is one of the things he's griped about a lot is how Christians so many continue to talk about these things in vague terms, and the same kind of terms that they've always talked about them in. And he says, let's be honest with ourselves and talk about these things specifically. Don't talk about sin and temptation in general terms. He's talked about how he's been in, young men's groups before, and people got all shocked and uncomfortable because he talked about pornography and masturbation directly in those terms. And I agree with him. It's sexual temptation has been around, however many thousands of years old the Old Testament stories are. And then, of course, we have many more outside of that from other cultures and other stories. It's a part of human nature, but it matters that technology has accelerated to the point now where that temptation is ubiquitous. That temptation is at your fingertips. You don't even have to be sitting at home in front of a computer, be, sitting at an airport. Luckily I've heard people talk about this. I've never been in an airport or a plane or a public area and walk past someone and notice they were watching porn. I can't believe that actually happens. But
well,
you got a problem, dude.
On the last international flight I was on, I was watching, I made the mistake of watching Suicide Squad because it's just such a bad movie. But I was like, might as well. And it got to the Harley Quinn sex scene. And it's rated R because it's all the gore in the movie. But then all of a sudden, I didn't think there was going to be a sex scene here. And with the way the flow, the way the movie was going, I definitely didn't think there was. And my first thought was, oh gosh, it's rated R. Becca's sitting next to me, flight attendants walking by, and I'm like, trying to cover my screen, like I'm trying to, not have a nudie movie showing in front of everybody.
Yeah.
But luckily they didn't show anything. It was a sex scene, but they didn't show anything. But it still caught me off guard, and I was like, crap, I didn't even think about that. So I started flipping through the movies, and I'm like, movies I've seen, I'm like, there's nudity in that movie, there's nudity in that movie, there's nudity in that movie. So it's not just the gratuitous violence or anything. It's like, wow, you got to be careful what you pick where you're at.
Yeah. because those things are not appropriate for children, whatever you think, theologically or philosophically.
Yeah.
Uh, but to your point, you can think something is timeless, like take it out of the realm of theology, the Constitution. All right, these principles are timeless, but what does that mean practically? How do we apply that practically? Um, it, if you don't consider these things, then you don't actually know your principles deep down. You only know them superficially. It's why, as you were talking, the thought occurred to me that some people might find it very odd that I'm sitting here and nodding along with you while you're talking about these, genetic and evolutionary ideas. No, because I have considered these things enough to come to the conclusion that these are not mutually exclusive ideas.
That and this is an open debate forum.
Mhm.
We're not debating in the I'm gonna get you and I'm gonna win. We're debating in the I express my ideas, you express yours,
Yeah.
and the audience gets to decide.
This is, and I talked about this going, and this is why I leaned on Sarna a lot, talking about the Genesis account, the creation account, is that it is specific enough and rational enough to break away from the supernatural, magical predecessors and even successors of the pagan ideas of creation, but also that it is vague enough that it can accommodate new knowledge. Even if you think the Garden of Eve is literal, there's a lot of gaps there. For instance, God tells Eve that your childbirth will now be the pains will now be greatly increased.
Which
Well,
to me, this is the progression of our brains were getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and we were having more and more painful childbirth over
mhm,
time. And by the time the biblical account comes around, our brains are about as big as they are now, pretty much
mhm.
equivalent. So we had reached our genetic potential there, I think, or at least very
That's
close to.
something really cool about that Nova series is one of the specialists they talk to is a guy who uh, specifically examines skull fragments, not just for size, but the wrinkles leave an imprint, and you can examine those and make an inference about the cognitive capability of that being, of that individual, based on that, which is really
Well,
cool. But the
and
the point,
there's another wrinkle to that I was talking about when we started mixing with Neanderthals is when we crossed over from the African uh, continent. Neanderthals were actually presumed to be smarter than us.
oh really?
We beat them out evolutionary in other ways. Probably our actual more propensity to sociality.
Mm,
We beat them with numbers, but they were bigger, stronger, and in by skulls and all the markers, they might have been smarter than us too. But when we mixed that, we might have automatically increased the size of our brain heads.
mhm.
So
Well,
there might be a leap forward effect that would cause somebody to write down in a book, this is going to start to hurt.
the that wasn't where I was going. Where I was going was that
That just popped in my head.
even if you take the Garden of Eden story literally, there's enough of a gap there. We're not told anything about time. We have no idea when in the creation story the Garden of Eden actually takes place, because there's kind of two creation stories. There's the overall story that takes place in chapter 1, and then in chapter 2 it focuses in on the creation of Adam, and then in chapter 3 it goes into the garden. Well, we have no idea where in the outline of chapter 1 this takes place, one, and two, the point about your pain and childbirth will be greatly increased, that implies Eve had children in the garden, or that the idea of childbirth was known in the garden, which means Are there people who exist outside of the garden? Were they there for a while having kids? Did those kids leave the garden? We don't know. There are enough gaps there that it can accommodate new knowledge to a point that you made. I don't remember if it was last time or the time before, about just genetically speaking, we can't have come from just two individuals. And we have enough genetic markers to say the reason it's called mitochondrial Eve is because that's the oldest that we can all trace back a common ancestor. It's not to say we definitively know this was the first Homo sapien woman.
Mhm.
No, we don't have that. We
It's
probably
it's the
can't have
furthest
that.
back one that died in a way that they were preserved enough that we could that we could get some information.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And my point about the reason I'm nodding along here is because I have thought enough and been self-critical enough and doubted enough to come to the point where I have gone through the various, philosophical steps that I can say, no, there's enough gaps here that it can accommodate new knowledge. To me, that's a small signification of its divine nature. To you, it's just coincidence or just evolution, whatever. The point being,
Well, evolution isn't coincidence. That's one of
eh,
the parts of the argument I hate is natural
hmm,
selection is not coincidence.
there's also this tautological idea that sometimes gets thrown out there in the way evolution is described by proponents that makes it seem like they're like evolution is a sentient thing making choices. I'm like, you can't do that. You have to describe it a
No.
different way if you're
Evolution
going to.
itself isn't a sentient thing, but the
But
people
the
involved in the process
way
or
people
the
describe the mechanism makes it, you know, strongly indicates that. That was a problem I had um, with
I
a
think that's what
professor
you
I took.
would I think that's what you would get if you read a review of the selfish gene, but that's not what you get if you read the book.
Hmm.
Because I mean, obviously a review of it sounds kind of like that. But then when you go into the mathematical models, you go into the the observational studies of just even things as small as viruses and that are just basically genetic code. They're not even something, basically
Hmm.
just genetic code and how they behave being a term used very loosely. There is a pattern to it though, and it's not a sentient thing. It's just the fact that the nature of this does this, and we're a very complicated version of this, so we're going to do that in a very complicated way.
Lobsters.
Lobsters.
All right. Well, we have once again meandered quite a bit, although I hope it was all useful and intelligible.
Well, we don't have
Did
to
you want
spend
to
too
take
much.
the?
Yeah, no, this is
Yeah,
more of a shock value thing, but
I
it's
wasn't sure. I wasn't sure how much time you wanted to spend on the weirdness, and if we wanted to go into that now
yeah.
or
Let's
later.
let's do it because I need to get it off my tabs because it's got a lot of stuff about it. Do you want to
Mhm.
do the Black Israelites first or the Raelians?
Let's do the Black Israelites first because I think you need to explain the rabbit holes you went down here that led you from the Black Israelites to the alien cult, because that was quite a trail.
Yeah. So this started in my well, of course I was drinking. It was a Friday night, and the Twitter files were coming out, and I was going through that. But also, that kept popping up was people saying "Bring back Kanye, bring back
Hmm.
Kanye," and I had watched the Tim Pool episode where he walked out on the episode, and then we were getting the news, and who knows what version of that you're getting. And I was hoping he would stay because I would love to hear what he had to say. But then I had heard what he had to say
Yeah.
on Alex Jones's show, and I'm like, well, okay, so
What
the
you have to
media
say is
was right
crazy.
for
All right.
once. But this guy that's off his rocker, well, what got me on this path wasn't just that, it was that brought up why he got banned from Twitter. And one of the things on the list was a symbol he had posted. And that symbol was, well, I guess I have to start with the Raelians first then, because the symbol was
Mm.
the Raelians. Let me.
Is there a connection with that symbol and the Black Hebrew Israelites? Where the heck did that come from, and why was Kanye posting it? Is the thing
Okay.
that made me scratch my head.
And this is the scratch my head part, because I think the post was a troll.
Mm.
But I think from his words, he believes the Black Israelite story.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's what got me going down there, because first of all, I saw this and I was reading all about it, and then I was like, well, I wonder what the connection, if there's a connection between this and the Kyrie Irving stuff and everything. So I had to first of all go deeper into what he exactly posted, the documentary, and then where the documentary came from and the beliefs of that. And there really wasn't, but I was reading about the Black Israelites, and I'm like, this is what Kanye's saying. And it's not the same as the symbol he posted, because he's not saying any of this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So but then other things came up where I'm like, I think this was a troll, but this is his actual belief. But both of them are bad. Both of them are bad. So let's start with the Raelians, because he posted, where's my share?
Okay, while you're pulling that up, I watched yesterday or the day before Crowder had Alex Jones on talking about this. And so you had postulated that you weren't entirely sure that was actually Kanye in the creepy mask, the creepy gimp mask. Alex Jones said that that was one of the first things he said because he got out of the car like that. And, Alex Jones said, "What's going on, man? And you gotta lift up the mask so I know it's you." And he said he lifted up the mask and it was Kanye.
Okay.
So that's from the beginning, he knew that this was going to be weird, because he got out of the car like that, which to me is odd. I understand if you know, put some sort of costume on for the camera because you're trying to make some sort of bizarre point, but to already be dressed up like that, man, that's weird.
Okay, so this is the Raelian movement, and if you look in the top left, there is their symbol. I
Yeah.
don't know if I want to blow up any bigger than that, because
No.
we're on YouTube. No, you know what? They actually posted some of this stuff on YouTube, so
Well, I thought we all knew by now
there,
because
it's a little bigger. There.
people have talked about this, that um the Nazi swastika was lifted, was a bastardization of a Hindi symbol that was then just turned around, because if you look at the swastika, the arms go the other direction, is the only difference. So this is a symbol that's been around for a while. Why they use that symbol inside the Star of David, did you ever figure that out?
I have.
Because
That's the next tab.
okay,
Yeah.
because you
Okay.
mentioned that when you were texting me this stuff, and I was going, "What the hell is all this?"
So this is the Raelian movement. Their thing is, we're talking the creation story of whether it's just evolution or actually uh, or originated with a supreme being.
Uh,
And I think we can both agree that this is kind of wackadoo.
oh yeah.
They disagree with both, because their origin story for the Earth, they don't have an origin story as far as I saw for who these original scientists were.
Mm.
But thousands of years ago, human scientists from another planet came to Earth and used DNA and genetic engineering to create all forms of life, including
So
human beings. So first of all, they're short Earthers, or whatever you call it, new Earthers, because they say thousands of years ago.
yeah.
And then
Well,
who
not
they created and
necessarily. They just mean for humans, for Homo sapien, because
it
as
says
you
all
say that.
forms of life.
Oh, it does. I thought it was just human life. Well then.
Including human beings who they created in their own image. References to these scientists in the work can be found in the ancient texts of many cultures. Okay.
Okay.
And our primitive ancestors, here's where the religions got it wrong, though. The primitive ancestors mistook them for gods because of their highly advanced technology, which actually would happen if you were presented with a highly advanced technological being as a primitive human. But that's neither here nor there. These are where truths can be a lie. Yet they referred to them as Elohim, which in ancient Hebrew mean those who came from the sky. And this word could also be found in the original Hebrew Bible,
Is
Genesis
it
1:1.
is one of the names that is used for God. I was trying to find where Prager talks about this. There are a number of names that are given to God, and Elohim is one of them. And I was trying to find, I thought he had an essay here on the differences between those names, but continue.
So here's their mission: spread the worldwide message that was given to their prophet Rael. I'm assuming Rael because I'm assuming it's a play on Israel.
Mm,
Uh,
mm, yeah.
yeah, coincidence there. Raelian movement, Israel,
Hmm.
Rael. Their prophet Rael, 1973 to 1975. This message explains how the Elohim created all life on earth, including the humans. Let us make man in our image, after our likeness. In this message, we can find extraordinary values and keys that help us become more harmonious beings, both physically and spiritually. And their second goal is to build an embassy on internationally recognized neutral territory where the Elohim can officially be welcomed and meet safely with our world leaders. Oh, I just thought of another rabbit hole.
Okay, here
I
it
wonder
is.
if they've tried to build something on Epstein Island.
Oh dear.
That was just a completely random thought, but
All right, so this is page 13 in Prager's Genesis book, uh, where he talks about the word Elohim. The word used here for God is Elohim. It is a plural noun, but the word used for created, bara, is in the singular. The Torah says Elohim created using the singular for the Hebrew verb create. If Elohim were plural, it would utilize the plural of the verb. The verb therefore tells us God is a singular entity. Um, any number of theories have been offered to explain why God's name is in the plural. The one that makes the most sense to me is that God, Elohim, encompasses all gods, which is something that Sarna talks about a lot, but that was the point of. But that's to address their wackadoo. Yes, like many languages, Hebrew is complicated, and ancient Hebrew is even more so because it's a quasi-dead language. It is not the Hebrew that is spoken today in Israel. It is a different language, and it's not entirely sure how a lot of these things are pronounced, though we have enough written evidence to translate the documents.
okay.
So yeah, you could define it that way. You could also define it a number of other ways, and the frickin' context frickin' matters, which is something we'll come back to when we talk about the Black Hebrew Israelites.
So self-love, these are their little tenets.
Yes.
Self-respect. They all sound good. They
Th-
make you feel good.
where you're
Accountability.
going here is what makes me wonder if, to your point, if he posted the symbol as a troll, if he was trying to subtly point people in a particular direction.
Absolute respect. Respect for others. Sharing. Democracy. Nonviolence. World peace. And femininity. Because femininity is
Is James Cameron a Raelian?
this is the rabbit hole part of this is okay, so my first thought, and this is between here and the Black Hebrew Israelites, my first thought was, is this a WEF? Because they're doing all of this.
Wasn't there something in there about world government along with world peace?
Yes, where was that?
That uh basically we have to what they're saying is we humanity as a whole have to achieve these things so that we can signal to our creators from the sky that we have evolved to a point where we are worthy of them coming back.
Yeah, there
And
was.
and one of those tenets was world government. And considering some of the weirdos he has around him, but also some of the things he himself has said about, you know, new world order, world economic forum, one world government kind of things, it it wouldn't surprise me if he posted this as a troll. And it also wouldn't surprise me if he, considering the things he said and his kind of wackadoo uh, actions lately, if he thinks that the Raelian movement is a front for the WEF or the other way around.
Well, so as I was going down that rabbit hole, I came across some stories. But this is their embassy they're trying to build,
Oh,
apparently.
lovely.
Yeah, lovely. And it doesn't say where, but I actually came across some things where they countered the WEF on something. So
Okay.
similar motives, but
Uh-huh.
basically the person that wants to do the thing I want to do, so I got to get rid of them. But let's go to the symbol. There's the symbol in uh, broken up there. But the Star of
Okay.
David represents infinity and space. The extraterrestrials who created humankind in laboratories have discovered that the infinite, sorry, it's hard to read this without laughing, infinitely large and infinitely small are alike. For instance, every atom in our hand is composed of infinitely small particles that are similar to planets and galaxies. Conversely, galaxies are particles of a huge atom in a gigantic universe, and so on to infinity, which is not unheard of to have that at least train of thought in the scientific community, because there is similarities in how a solar system is formed versus even the smallest atom in your hand. So yeah, but resembling something and then being the same thing are
Mm-hmm.
two different things.
Well, it's especially resembling something and then having a philosophical idea versus resembling something, and thus I will make this hard scientific statement.
Well, it's because they're, I know we're not allowed to have objective facts, but because they're subject to the same forces. Look at a leaf and your intravenous system. They
Yeah.
look the same, but it's because we're both subject to fluid dynamics, and these things
Mm.
follow path of least resistance. Same as a tributary coming out of a river. It's exactly the same. They grew in the path of least resistance, which happened to be environmentally specific at every moment in a time that it was developing. Same thing with your solar system, same thing with the atoms. They're all subject to the same forces, so they're going to have a similar pattern. The swastika in the center reminds us of the shape of our galaxy and represents infinity in time. Everything in the universe, in the infinitely large as well as infinitely small, is in constant transformation. Matter has no beginning and no ending. Everything is cyclical. That's a true kind of a statement,
Okay.
but I don't know how the swastika represents that. But maybe that goes back to the Hindi. But again, per their belief, Hindu belief is a misrepresentation of the same thing told to the others.
Okay.
And their belief is the Elohim contacted all these world leaders, and it all the different religions we got out of it were that are similar were just different interpretations by the human the fallible humans that were given the message. Swastika, symbol of peace. We don't want to go down there. But here's
Okay.
where you were talking. You sent me, is there a Malthusian part to it?
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, so they do prescribe to the fact that we have too many people, and that's going to cause us to not. This one was kind of wackadoo.
Wait, are these the same people that have the um crap, what's it called? There's this group in Iowa. Why they founded their university in Iowa. It's the people who believe that if you meditate hard enough you can fly, and you can also do astral projection.
Mm,
I'm drawing a blank on what the group is called.
let's see if they tell us where they are. Our organization. Because I'm wanting to say I saw Iowa when I was fishing through here.
Because if so, these people have been around for a little while.
Was that?
If so, these people have been around for a while.
I'll confirm that before our next episode. But
Transcendental meditation. That's the word I was trying to. That was what I was trying
yeah,
to get
yeah,
to.
this is they believe in this kind of stuff. With everybody is one, but again, we're taking normal human behaviors and
Okay, no, it was founded
senses.
by different people.
Yeah,
Yeah, I digress.
yeah. As we digress, but this is how crazy it is, and the reason this is important is the events that were happening align the Kanye troll, I think. But also this is huge. This might be the biggest cult that's ever existed.
Mm,
If you don't count other world religions as cults. This is as big as a lot of world religions. This is hundreds of thousands of people at least. And those are people that are open about it. How many people would not be open? This is
yeah,
bigger than QAnon. And look at what kind of effect these beliefs can have on things.
maybe bigger than Scientology.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to compare next, but I didn't have time to go into that. But the reason I think it also might be a troll, see if I got to the right page here, is because they gave someone an award. Here we go. I think this is it.
Honorary guides.
Mm-hmm.
Uh,
Now these awards are given uh whether the person wants it or not. So they
okay.
oh wasn't Bill
Bill
Gates, so
Gates.
that would be important. I thought it was the front page because it was one of the first things I saw, which is what got my mind thinking it was a troll. Well, it was Elon Musk,
Okay.
and he was given when he first put in to buy Twitter, he was given the award. I didn't see this page before. Maybe they made
Yikes.
it. Oh, Zuckerberg.
Zuckerberg.
Maybe they made him take his picture down after, which
Huh.
would
Oh yeah, I forgot you mentioned that. That was one of the texts you sent me. Is
yeah. But either way, there was a big giant picture of Elon's face when I went there, and I was like, I wonder if he put that symbol up because he saw Elon was an honorary guide or whatever, and
yeah.
so that's why I think it was a troll because those beliefs are not necessarily the line he was going down. Other than to say there are people that believe that the Israelites weren't the story we think they are.
Hmm.
But then I went down the other rabbit hole because of what he was saying, because he made statements like, I'm not anti-Semitic because I'm a Jew.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. That's right. That's where the Black Hebrew Israelite weirdness came from. It's because
Yes.
I remembered seeing those clips and going, wait, is he identifying with these people?
Yeah. And so I had to dig into them. When we talked about the Kyrie Irving thing, he
Hmm.
shared nope, not that one. He shared the cover of
Hmm.
this film, which goes into the story of the Black Hebrew Israelites, which the story per this belief system is that the current or black people as descendants were the original Hebrews, and that Europeans came in about 800 AD and took their place, and then
Ah,
rewrote history to make it seem like they were there all the time.
I didn't realize that they. So I have annoyingly I've learned more about these people than I want to. I have learned that there are there's more than one sect of this, and they don't all agree.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought that what they claimed was that they were the last lost tribe of Israel, and the last true Israelites and Jews. I didn't
Yeah.
know they claimed to be the original or the only, is what it sounds like they're saying there.
Mm-hmm.
Um, that that this tribe from which Black Americans descend went to Africa while the rest were scattered in the diaspora that occurred with the Babylonian conquest and then centuries of history after that.
Yeah, and they had let's see, where's the name of the here we go. Oh no, that wasn't it. That was someone later. But they had a name for the Europeans that came over. Let's see. Here we go. They claim that Jews are imposters who stole the religious heritage of Black people and have engaged in a cover up to prevent Black people from knowing their true identity.
Yes.
Yeah. So,
I should also point out this is coming from the ADL, which keep in mind that these people are a far left political activist organization that cloak themselves in Jewishness and accusations of anti-Semitism to protect themselves from criticism. So take what you hear from the ADL with a grain of big honkin' salt.
well, I went through a lot of different sources that came up, and that was the clearest, best explanations of it. But they all were in alignment. So it wasn't just what they're saying. All the different sources had this kind of the same review of it. This was just the clearest, most and I don't mind using a left-leaning source if it's probably correct.
I use Wikipedia sometimes because it makes the point clearly.
Yeah.
But just keep that in mind when you hear that the ADL has declared that someone or something is anti-Semitic. I mean, they've attacked Ben Shapiro, for crying out loud, and he's attacked them because their politics don't line up. So, let's pause for a second while I refill my beverage because
let's call it an end to the religious discussion. And but yeah, that was the rabbit hole I went down, and this is where we can come into agreement. There's wackadoo shit out there, but this is actually dangerous because people actually believe this stuff. Now think of who Kanye is and how much actual reach and power he has, and he's spreading these ideas. I don't think there should be censorship, but we should know what he's talking about so we can counter it.
Exactly. You should know what he's talking about. And like I said, I had heard the name Black Hebrew Israelites before in connection with other things. I wasn't entirely sure what they believed. And then when you go looking, you will find some different sects. Even in that ADL bullet point thing, they mentioned that there's more than one group that claim this mantle. And what they don't go down is the different theologies and ideas that these different groups has, and that matters,
which matters for this day and age, because I've got another book up here, Stamped from the Beginning by Ibram X. Kendi. Right. So if you go through that book, it's basically saying the same thing, but it's specific to America. It's we are the people that have been chosen to be oppressed, which is what the Black Hebrew Israelites are. They came and took our place. We were the original oppressed people. They took that from us because they found the advantage in coming from that.
Yes.
And so, yeah.
And this is where Kanye, before he went off the deep end, the first comments he made about this, and then also the people who are criticizing Kyrie Irving, this is where there is a kernel of truth there that needs to be understood. And I'll preface this by saying I've mentioned this before, that I hate the meme about being oppressed and all this crappy stuff they went through, but they don't bitch about it and ask for free stuff now because the Irish aren't pussies. Okay, yeah, the Irish, the Italians, the Jews, some other groups, the Asian groups, they had a really raw deal when they came here. They weren't put into chattel slavery, though. There's a big difference. That's a detail that frickin' matters. So you do have to recognize the unique history of Black Americans. That doesn't mean you have to agree with people like Ibram X. Kendi, but you do need to recognize the unique history. Same thing with the Jews. As a people, they have been more than just ostracized, but they have been outsiders wherever they went, and that outsider status has repeatedly and routinely led to accusations of conspiracy that have led to acts of murder and
Mm-hmm.
abuse. Okay. So you do have to keep that in mind. That does matter. At the same time, the ADL doesn't have a leg to stand on here when they talk about the tropes that the Black Hebrew Israelites use. Well, for one, because that isn't inherently and necessarily anti-Semitic. It is okay, but then what do you do with that?
Mm-hmm.
The danger is that that can be used to attack these people, and it has been used in the past. You better be darn careful with what you say about it. I would also point out that then ADL, have you labeled all Muslims anti-Semitic? Because that is a core tenet of Islamic belief. That is how they can claim to be. I should rephrase. That is why they claim to be descendants of Abraham as well, and yet the Jews are wrong, because according to their tradition, they are all descendants from Abraham, but they split with Jacob and Esau. That Esau was cheated out of his birthright, and then the Israelites, the Jews, rewrote history to benefit them. That is why their prophecies and their tenets are wrong, and Muhammad is the one true prophet because he comes from that true branch. It's the same idea. Mormons do the
Which
same
is
thing.
really tough from a secular stance, because
Mhm.
I hear the stories from all the sides, and there is some truth to the victors writing the history books. So, but the problem is they're all saying it. So we got to find all the commonalities and go forward is the answer to that, not try to pick one and say you're the right one.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and
But some come up that are so ridiculous, like the Black Hebrew Israelites. I mean, it's another it's about me movement, realistically,
yes,
and it really is sparked by these movements. It's the next step.
that was my main point
This
that I was going to
movement is
make about
it's
them.
about me with America, and then that's just the next step. This is the marijuana to the
The
meth.
the Black
It's
Hebrew Israelite origin story is a way to say we are extra special.
mm-hmm.
Not for anything that I or we are doing right now or have done, but because of where we come from. That's actually why I asked if you had done, ancestry or something like that, because all of that stuff is really neat. It's fun to talk about. It's fun to look at and learn where you came from. But
you
so
know
what? Now what?
Kanye can do that exact same test I did and see if he ever pops up to Israel. We could solve this right now.
Or even
Of
in
course, he
Af
would say
yeah,
because Jews designed the test or something.
or something.
Yeah, yeah.
But
Don't
but
clip
if you
that and call me an anti-Semite. I was proposing what somebody like him would say.
but for the sake of argument, let's say you are correct, whether it's what you were talking about with they were the true original Israelites, or what I thought it was, which was this, lost tribe. You claim to be Christians, even though you call yourself Hebrew Israelites, but you claim to be Christians to follow Christ. That means that's all irrelevant, because we are told a number of times in the New Testament that there is neither Jew nor Gentile, that those distinctions are gone. So again, just for the sake of argument, let's say you're correct. It's not any more special than us taking a DNA test to look at our family ancestry. Cool. Okay. But we are who we are right now.
It still is
And
fun.
it still is fun. But then to use that to say, therefore, I am better than you are, therefore you are wrong about this thing.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Well, it would settle a lot of things too, because we just have everybody from every claimant of this one piece of land in the world take that test and see how many of them match. Guess what? The thing is, almost every single one of them are going to go through that,
At some point, yeah.
and then you're gonna say, guess what? You're all wrong or right. There is
It,
nobody has a claim here because we all went through the same path.
it's all nonsense because it's all manufactured outrage
Hmm.
for manufactured tribalism. All right, well, let's stop talking about that nonsense and talk about something fun. But
Okay.
pause for a second.